That's a wonderful question. It's probably something that we did, but do you think
Hello, good morning.
infusion of
Good evening for you.
AI and how
We can't hear you. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah.
Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you good. All good.
All right.
Much better than yesterday.
Yeah, it looks like today is the day for our internet in Australia to work.
Yeah, that's good. Can you share screen so that we, figure out
I'll
if there are
share
any
the
issues?
screen. Oh, it says you've disabled my screen sharing. Hold on. Can you let me do that? Okay. I'm sharing my screen now. How's that working?
It's good. I can see everything. There are no videos, right?
No videos, just still. Yes, and now I can scroll through.
Yeah. Yeah, all good. All good.
Perfect. All right.
No lag, no disturbance, right?
No, it seems to be working quite well today.
Oh, that's great.
I told all my children not to be on the internet for this hour, so that might help us.
Yeah, I guess that was a good idea.
Yeah.
So we're on, we're
For the
prepared.
house.
So the previous session is still going on. There's a last question and answer session going on. So
Sure.
you can be on the link. I'll be on the link with you. And were you able to log in to view the event?
Yes, I was eventually. Yes, yes. It wouldn't let me do it with international phone numbers, but after you gave that other number, that was fine. I got in.
Yeah, so you can go ahead and share that number with any of your colleagues or anyone who wants to
Excellent.
who wishes to
Thank you.
view the event. So we'll be on the link. If there are any issues, you can stop sharing. And Harish sir will join in at say 11:30 as soon as that
Okay.
session is over. So I'll brief you then.
All right.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
You can stop sharing. No problem.
I might just leave it there. So I'm ready.
No, I think we should begin with having a full screen of yourself.
All right. No problem. Yep, that's okay. All right, good.
I'll be here, but I'll just switch off my video. All right.
All right, no problem.
Yeah, so we are on in 2 minutes.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, all good.
No problem. Yep.
I start.
Yeah, so Harish sir is just going to join in on the link and he'll give you an introduction. And then I think we can start on dot at 11:30.
Excellent.
Right.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
You'll be sharing screen, right?
I will be sharing my screen. Yes.
If you are, if you want us to share the screen, we can do that, but whichever one that you're comfortable with.
That's fine. I can share it. It's okay.
Okay, great.
Sure. Once I'm ready.
From a session discussing technology and toys, we move on to a session which shall focus on urban spaces, architecture, and clay. Our next speaker of the day is architect Adrian Light. Adrian Light has worked in architecture since 1988 and is currently the managing director of 120 Group Architects. He has specialized international competence in the design of buildings of all scales, including several award-winning designs and revolutionary sustainable projects. His work spans through several notable
Hello, I hope you can hear now. But look, welcome to Melbourne, Australia, and it's a pleasure for me to. So, welcome to. Yes, hello. So, welcome to Melbourne, Australia, and it's a pleasure for me to be hosted in Ahmedabad in India, and I really do feel like I am at the moment in India. As will become apparent in my talk, it's a pleasure to be in these spaces and to see the architecture of your virtual conference centre. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And the topic of my talk today is architect or toy dwelling in undesigned spaces. And this discussion commences with two principles, really, two key ideas that I'm starting with as an assumption. Firstly, there's the idea of the toy as it's used in graffiti or street art culture. So we're not talking about a toy as a play object or something that some of you designers might create, but it's something that is a disruption. So in street art, if a graphic work on a wall is considered inferior or illegitimate because it's a mere copy of another piece or carried out by a less than often inexperienced artist, then it's not considered worthy art, and it's spray painted over with the word toy and that kind of questions its validity. So even though it might exhibit all the characteristics of street art and would satisfy many definitions of graffiti art, and even though that perhaps someone whose wall's been spray painted over might consider it graffiti, to the street art community, it's just thought to be a mere representation rather than art itself. And there's some examples there where secondary artists have come across art that they don't think is worthy, and they've spray painted the word toy over the top to say, this is just a representation, this is not real art. The second principle we're talking about is the idea of the body and the concept that we understand space and therefore architecture through is our body. So the body tells us about the world through perception, and we'll talk a little bit further.
So there was a minor glitch. I think you'll have to restart your presentation. I'm very sorry for that.
No problem.
But there was a minor glitch on our network.
Okay. So you want me to start right from the start again? Can you hear me okay? Hi there.
Hi, Adrian. We did a tech check yesterday, and this happened the other way around today.
Right. Okay. That's all right.
We disconnected.
Yeah. No, that's
So
okay.
I'm going to start over again, so it gets a little. The intro is complete, and then we start the session.
Okay. No problem. All right. So I'll start from the very start again. No problem.
Wonderful. So our next speaker for the day is architect Adrian Light. Adrian Light has worked in architecture since 1988 and is currently the managing director of 120 Group Architects. He has specialized international competence in the design of buildings of all scales, including several award-winning designs and revolutionary sustainable projects. His work spans through several notable and award-winning projects, and he has more recently been working as a specialist designing environmentally sustainable buildings. His latest project is a conversion of the Skipping Girl Vinegar Factory, which was featured on the TV series Brand Designs and The Living Room, and is a subject of a documentary on Architel TV. We're not live? We're not live yet. Adrian,
No
I'm going to
problem.
do that twice. This is
You should. You'll be very good at it by the end.
I'm talking about you. Feel proud, man.
You'll have it done, Pat, by the time it's finished.
Some glitches. I heard you requested your kids to not use the internet.
I did. I've sent them out.
We should have told our kids as well over here.
There's somebody at the door.
Please go ahead. He's got somebody at the door. He's gone. दूध वाला है वो.
Ready. Hello, welcome to Melbourne, Australia. And it's a great pleasure for me to be in Ahmedabad in India. And I really do feel like I am in India, and I'm in your wonderful virtual conference center. And I guess as will become apparent in the talk, we'll see what's happening. So this talk is entitled Architect or Toy, Dwelling in... Sorry.
Adrian, let's wait. We're still not live.
We're still not live.
There's
Okay.
still some glitches.
Okay. Is it at your end or it's not my end?
It's on our end.
Okay.
We're still connected
no
to a few
problem.
wires. We have 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay, that's all right. If you can just give me a cue as to
Sure,
when
I
I
will,
should
I will.
start talking, perhaps. That's all right.
I will. Sure.
Yeah. Here. Monty.
अरे ये तो फिर से ऊपर चला गया.
Monty. Monty, are you here? Monty? Hi, Mike. So look, I'll just send you a text when you're allowed to come back in, okay? I'm about to start my talk. Okay, all right. Okay, how did you get out? How did you lock the door? How did you get out? Yeah, how did you lock the door and get out? Oh, okay, and then shut the door. Okay, yep, all right. Okay, so I'll send you a text when I'm finished. It's just been a bit delayed, okay? All right, bye.
Few more minutes. They're still trying to figure things out.
No problem. That's all right, no problem.
Yeah. Adrian, we're still stuck with some connectivity issues and stuff. So we're trying to see how we can, work this out. I'll need a few more minutes.
No problem. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
No problem. Can you take that squeaky toy from Marvin?
Adrian, what we'll do is we'll probably give you a WhatsApp message
Okay.
once things are fine. I'm hoping another 10 minutes we should be good.
Okay.
Yeah,
No
we'll
problem.
send you a WhatsApp message and then
Sure.
we get back on. Yeah,
All right. No problem.
a few more minutes. I'm really, really sorry.
No problem. That's all right. Things happen.
Thank you. Thanks for understanding. Pleasure.
No, wait.
No.
Let's see whether he's still sitting or we already done.
No, he's there. Adrian, can we do this? We're good? Can we go live?
Yes, I'm ready.
Great. We're back from a session discussing technology and toys and a much needed technology internet break. We move on to a session which shall focus on urban spaces, architecture, and play. Our next speaker of the day is architect Adrian Light. Adrian Light has worked in architecture since 1988 and is currently the managing director of 120 Group Architects. He has specialized international competence in the design of buildings of all scales, including several award-winning designs and revolutionary sustainable projects. His work spans through several notable and award-winning projects, and he has more recently been working as a specialist designing environmentally sustainable buildings. His latest project is a conversion of the Skipping Girl Vinegar Factory, which was featured on the TV series Grand Designs and The Living Room, and is a subject of a documentary on Architel TV. It won the 2017 Sustainability Award in the Heritage category, amongst other awards. Today, he's here with us to talk about architect or toy, dwelling in undesigned spaces. Over to you, Adrian. Thank you very much for waiting it out for the session.
Not a problem, not a problem. Yes, well, welcome to Melbourne, Australia. And thank you for hosting me. It's really great to be in Ahmedabad in India. And I really do feel like I'm there, particularly having worked my way through your website. And as I guess will become apparent in my talk, I really do feel like we are in space and we are in those buildings that I can see in your virtual conference centre.
Pleasure.
So I'm sharing my screen with you now. So the topic of my talk today is architect or toy dwelling in undesigned spaces. And this discussion commenced with two key principles. So firstly, we've got the idea of the toy as it's used in graffiti or street art culture. So this isn't a toy as a play object that some of you as toy designers might create. It's something that's more of a disruption. So in street art, if a graphic work on a wall is considered inferior or illegitimate, it's a mere copy of another piece or carried out by a lesser, often younger, inexperienced artist that is not considered worthy art and is spray painted over with the word toy to question its validity. So even though it might exhibit all the characteristics of street art and would satisfy many of the definitions of graffiti art, and even though if it was sprayed on your wall, you might think it's graffiti, but to graffiti artists, it's thought to be a mere representation rather than art themselves. And you can see in these images here above, there's a number of pieces of street art that have been considered not art and have been spray painted by a secondary artist with the word toy to signal that this is not art for them. So the second idea that we're talking about is the idea of the body and the concept that we can understand space and therefore architecture, our body and its perception of the world. So this concept that we're talking about is going to heavily draw on the principles of the French existentialist philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and we'll go through some of his ideas later in the talk. So we're really asking, what is architecture in a sense? And the question is asked, what place is there for spaces that do not encompass the human body or are not specifically designed by a human? And the example here that I'm showing is the Roby House by Frank Lloyd Wright, a magnificent piece of architecture. And also the same piece of architecture as designed by the makers of Lego. And Lego have done a lot of architectural models. And I guess we're asking, is one piece of design better than the other? We're going to be asking a lot of questions in this talk and come up with some answers, I think. So what we're asking is, can a disruptive art such as graffiti be used to challenge the idea that architecture must have a human hand? Can it be more than human? Can we understand the relational properties of space through nature, perhaps? Could this idea be the seed that uncovers the nature of nature? Another question is, are models of buildings architecture? Or are they mere toys? And what role does play, and in particular spatial play, have in understanding architecture? And this will be something that's of particular interest to the toy designers here. And I guess the question that I have is, in the image on the bottom, there's some people there in the model. And I wonder if having people in a model of a building, does that then create the idea that you're in the building? Does that create the idea that these models are in fact architecture, perhaps? And another question we have is, are computer game spaces architecture? So games such as Minecraft not only act as utilities to build computer models, they create spaces for play. A toy is something you play with, but it also signals a simulation. Now, when I enrolled in this conference, and I was actually helping my mother, Iris Hooper, who's an artist, I was helping her negotiate her way into looking at the lectures. And as you will have done, we worked our way on the website. We worked our way at the entrance to the conference. We saw the banners. We walked down the path, and these were the words that I was using to describe to my mother how to get into the website. So I was saying, walk down the path, look to your left, click on the arrow that says auditorium, move into the auditorium, look for the hall. So these were all directions and all spatial directions that I was describing. It was as though we were inside the computer model for this conference, and something that you will have all done, I'm sure, to get to this talk. And the question is asked, I guess, are these spaces architecture? I guess firstly, are they space? And secondly, is there a representation or a meaning to these spaces? Leading on to that is another question. Is the space of movies and cyberspace architecture? Or is it just another representation, not real art, but a copy, a toy? So often cinema's thought to be a two-dimensional representation of a two-dimensional object. You can see the set of the film Metropolis in the top corner, and they are copies of buildings. They're two-dimensional, but is the cinema actually a three-dimensional object? It portrays space in three dimensions, but it also portrays a fourth dimension, portrays time. And it could argue that there's a fifth dimension that's added, and that's the dimension inside the cinema. So when you're watching a movie and you're sitting in your comfy chair and you have people around you, you're in a social space, and there's meaning to those spaces. So there's a different meaning when you watch a film while you're sitting on the couch or lying in bed as to when you're in the space of the cinema. These are all different social spaces. I guess there's got to be a point at which we stop this analogy, though. Not everything can be architecture. So some things or people that are described as architecture or architects are definitely not architects. We see the terms hair architects, computer architects, but these are really just metaphors. They're just representations. They're toys, if you like. I've certainly, if you look at the man in the top of this screen, I certainly haven't seen an architect who looks like this. So perhaps architects are different. So our architectural models, the actual design. So we move from the toy building of Lego, which is a copy of a building that someone's designed, to an actual model of a design. So this is moving away from the idea of a toy, something to be played with, but it's meant to be a representation of the larger building, something that will be built to a bigger scale. So our architectural models, the actual design. If architectural drawings are architecture, and unbuilt work, so work that's been designed and maybe had a model or drawings made of it, but never built, that's often considered to be architecture. But then are the models that you see in this picture, are they also architecture? And these pictures might be what the public thinks architects look like. And in the bottom corner, you can see a famous Japanese architect there with a model of her scheme that she's designed and is presenting with great passion. But maybe, just maybe architects look like this instead. These trees. Could they be architects? Can nature produce architecture? And this is where we want to kind of get to in this talk. So can we have a design that is not created by humans, but still be called architecture? So, and the cave might be an obvious example with its utility value as shelter. But what I'm particularly interested in is the possibility that trees as living things offer as the spatial designers themselves. So could the trees be the architects, or is there architecture in particular arrangements of trees that perhaps occur naturally, perhaps are planned? So there's some recent research that suggests that trees form a social system. Beeches and oaks battle out on a field of war for supremacy, and frangipani trees communicate to each other via fungal trails, and acacias send warnings to each other across the airways. If so, could they be architects? And is this what a tree looks like? Is the question that I'm asking. And what I'd say is these pictures here are more accurate. We can kind of see the difference between the trees on the right and here, a tree showing all its roots. And this is what a tree looks like. Similar to an iceberg, we often miss half of it. The tree is a network of roots and connections with other plants and fungi. The work of Suzanne Sinnard and Peter Walburn has exposed the Forest Society to be an underground set of partnerships between trees and fungi, known as mycorrhiza. Old trees nurture young saplings and even trees of another species through this network, exchanging sugars like currency with the merchant fungi. If architecture reflects society and culture, then why not also the society of trees? In Africa, there's acacia plants, and when a giraffe takes a bite of one acacia leaf, it sends chemical trails off into the air. These aren't the chemical trails of the conspiracy theories, but they're chemicals that are released from the plants that when they hit the next acacia, it has a reaction and it turns its leaves bitter as protection against the giraffes. So there's communication between plants. So I guess we're asking the question, could this idea of the toy or a representation that lacks essence be the seed that allows us to re-experience the body and cut through the complexity of architecture? And perhaps there's inherent qualities in nature that we recognise and repeat in architecture, such as rhythm, for example. So we're not here necessarily saying that the architect is the tree, but what we're saying is that the spaces that are produced by the trees growing might have inherent architectural properties. So it's not merely a copy of nature we're talking about, like a toy will produce, but an implementation of essential architectural elements. And of course, we don't want to take the analogy too far. So not all nature is architecture. So not every piece of grass or hill is architecture. And I guess what we're saying is that there's some essential elements that might give us almost a value judgment of something that is architecture, something that might be produced by a designer or produced by a non-designer, but it has architectural elements at its essence. So how do we get to an essence? So this is where we delve a bit deeper into philosophy. And so for the French existentialist Maurice Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology is a way to examine essences, and therefore a way to understand what is the essence of architecture, and therefore how trees might be essentially architectural. For Merleau-Ponty, language is not simply a bodily expression, but inherent to the very possibility of thought. In this way, it could be argued through discovering the language of architecture, it might be possible to discover its essence and therefore its meaning. And can we then apply this language of architecture that we discover, can we apply that to nature, to trees? Can we recognise that we see in buildings in perhaps a grove of trees? So Merleau-Ponty asserts that it is through our body that we understand space. For him, the world is already there. It is not created by the mind. He believes that the world is not in man, but man is in the world. And really key to that is our senses. That's the way we understand the world is through our senses: taste, touch, vision, hearing. His contention is that it is our perception of the world through our senses that is important, because we have no other way of interacting with the world, and therefore it is our body that contains our senses that informs our understanding of space. And more than that, it is space that forms our body and our understanding of ourselves and our society. Without our body, it can be argued that we don't have a social system. So it's the intertwining of the body with space that is crucial to the essence of both. Merleau-Ponty implicates space under three alternative models of the body and its relation to space, and I'll detail them because they're a little bit complex. Firstly, there's the notion of the body as pre-conscious subject. Secondly, there's the notion of the body as being distinct from things. And thirdly, is the notion of the flesh of the body. So firstly, we've got the body as subject. And Merleau-Ponty's body is not the ghost in the machine that Descartes describes. For him, vision is not thinking about seeing as Descartes would have it. It's not just that you think about seeing, it's that you're in the world. So he says that vision is a gaze at grips with the world, and that it is why, for me, there can be another's gaze. So that's how we understand how other people understand the world. So it's not it doesn't really matter if the body is real or not for Merleau-Ponty. For him, the body is a meaning-giving existence. So the body is always oriented in space. The body extends itself via prosthetic when driving, for example. The body, you'll often kind of, when you're driving, you'll often crouch to avoid a bridge or try and squeeze yourself down to get through a tight place, a gap in the traffic. The body is also the very possibility of moving. Without the body, you cannot move from space to space. And so by placing the body in space, by dwelling in it, it's given meaning. So here the tree is green or purple, only because a human sees it as green or purple. He says, I see my green in the other's green. The second idea that Merleau-Ponty has is the body is distinct from things. He explains how the body can be in the world with the things as a connection, but also be distinct from them as a collision. He demonstrates this in 4 ways to show that the body is not just a physical object. So firstly, a person can never escape their body. You can't be without your body. You can't be thoughts on your own. Secondly, the body can have a double sensation. So the right hand can grab the left hand and both feel each other. So the right hand feels the left and the left feels the right at the same time. We've got a double sensation where you interact with the world, but you're also interacting with yourself. The body is the site of pain, but not its source. So when you tread on a nail, you feel pain in your foot, but the source of the pain is the nail. It's not your foot. And fourthly, as we talked about, the body is the potential for movement. It allows you to move around. Thirdly, there's the idea of the body as flesh. And Merleau-Ponty uses the concept of the flesh to explain how the body and space are intertwined. We share space with others, and a notion of a common world is established. He asserts that I am my body. The flesh is neither mind or body, but the possibility of. It is elemental, and it's the originator of meaning. The body is both sentient and sensible, and each form is intertwined in the other. The flesh is the element that allows the body to communicate with the world. Without the flesh, neither the body or space have meaning. An observer can only perceive space if they are themselves part of the same flesh as the world. Merleau-Ponty explains, he who sees cannot possess the visible unless he is possessed by it. And perhaps it's the ability to dwell in space that transforms it into architecture. So we're moving along here with our ideas, and we're kind of fast forwarding through a lot of philosophy, but we're asking the question now, getting it back to architecture, is, does it need to be dwelt in to be architecture? What does it mean to dwell, as Martin Heidegger might refer to it in his book, Building, Dwelling, Thinking? And Christine Colleen notes the following in her paper, Thinking About Dwelling in Building. She says, Heidegger mentions that the old meaning of bauen, to dwell, or can mean to dwell, but it also means to cherish and protect, to preserve and care for, specifically to till and soil, to cultivate the vine. So when thinking about the concept of dwelling in regards to architecture, it suggests that a building should protect and cultivate our cultural habits. If our culture as beings has now been removed, dwelling as a characteristic, then our language has changed in order to reflect this removal. Language has become an expression or a representation of being. So here we're talking about, again, the idea of a toy being just a representation, not the real thing, not architecture. She's saying here that when architecture tries to just represent something rather than thinking about what it might be as a social object, then it becomes mere representation, and it forgets about people, forgets about the body. In this way, it follows that buildings that are merely functional, that just shelter or protect, or even, whilst very important, are even just very sustainable buildings, whilst providing good design and whilst still being occupied by humans, they're not dwelt in. They're not creating social meaning, and therefore, according to her, they're not architecture. Nor can they just be representations only. Killeen claims that the language of a building should preserve its nature, not be thought about as a form of expression or representation. And she cites Norberg Schultz, who further says, works of architecture do not portray anything and are hence to be understood as non-representational images. So by that, she further goes on to say, architects are having trouble translating the nature of a building because they are translating the language as representation, losing the meaning of buildings as just a building and a dwelling place for beings. The aesthetic view of art stems from the man-centered metaphysic of modernity and coheres with the concept of beings as what is objectively representable. That a work of art is a thing, a crafted thing with aesthetic value superimposed on it. Architects are using buildings as objects to represent a work of art, forgetting that beings as dwellers need to dwell in it as part of their nature. Okay, so we've moved away from our initial question in a sense, but if we return to the aim of our talk in a way, which is to look at non-designed architecture, we return to this initial question: is this tree architecture? And I was going for a walk with my son the other day through our local park. We came across a tree that had been hit by lightning, and it had been severed at the trunk, and it had fallen completely upside down, a little bit like this image here. And I looked at the tree, and it was a beautiful object. It had formed this sort of canopy, and my son ran over. He's 11 years old, and he started to play under the canopy of the fallen tree, and he was climbing on it, and our dogs started to run around, and this became a play space for them. And I started to think, is this architecture? Is this space, is it a toy? Now, I guess some of you designers might be put out of a job, but for me, trees are almost the best toy. They're infinitely creative, but not just that. I guess we're creating a space here under the tree, and it becomes a dwelling. It takes on meaning. Once something's played in, it has a meaning, even if it's a representation. That almost the fact that it's representing something means that it's given meaning. So is this tree a picture? Is it a toy? I guess what I'm saying is that suddenly, by being inhabited, by being lived in and being dwelt in, the tree gains meaning and becomes architecture. Just in this picture here of a boy up a tree, thankfully it's not my 11-year-old son, but it's not merely by giving scale to the object, it's the body that creates the architecture, that forms it. They're not mere representation, they give each other meaning. So further, we start to hone our ideas here. We can dwell in a place without physically inhabiting it. We can project our bodies in space so that we understand it as architecture through our bodies, even as our bodies are absent from it. So this is how we can dwell in models. This is how I can be in the Metabud, in the conference center. This is how I can be in the movie space. This is how I can be in the Minecraft game and move around. And that's how even the toys that some of you designers make as cultural objects, this is how we can dwell in them. This is how we can be in the space of toys. So whether something is architecture or not, it ceases to be a value judgment. Instead, it becomes really a measure of its essence. So I've used a disruptive art form here, the art form of graffiti art, to challenge the old ideas that architectural space can only be created by humans. And what I'm concluding here is that nature too can be an architect. A tree can be a meaningful representation of space, and it can exhibit architectural qualities. And it's true that it's our humanity through our body that the architectural space the tree creates can be dwelt in and be given meaning. So in conclusion, representations of architecture are valid if they are meaningfully dwelt in. The body gives this architecture its meaning. So the essential elements of architecture can be produced in nature, and trees are a real wonderful example of this. So can we surmise that there are no toys or misrepresentations in architecture? Well, maybe not, but we can certainly do is embrace and enjoy the architectural toys in our creative, corporeal, and natural world.
That was a wonderful, wonderful, enlightening session. Very philosophical. Just glad to hear Marlon Ponte's perceptions, views as well. Very interesting comparison with architecture, nature being a toy, nature and architecture, and hence we being part of a larger toy, and architecture being an extension of human itself. Very, very interesting. Lots of things to think about in the session for me. Before we, I would want to put up a few questions from the viewers. So there's one question from Dhanashri. This is a little away from what you've actually discussed today, but I guess she's been following you. She says, can you share some experience while working on your Skipping Girl vinegar factory project with reuse, recycle, and repurpose aspect?
Sure, not a problem. Well, I'm actually in that building at the moment, so I can give you a little view around it. And this is actually so we can see one of the vinegar vats there, which we've turned into a fish pond. So the idea in this particular building was to really create it with zero waste. So we had no skips or rubbish bins on site. So everything that was on site when we started had to stay on site unless it was recycled. So we collected all of our steel scraps and in the various vats, and at the end of the job we recycled them. We any timber that was cut, we created a bin for that, and we used that for firewood in the neighborhood. And I guess the other key thing was just reusing things. So the concrete that I'm in one of the vats now, which we opened up to form our workstations, and the excess of that concrete was either recycled or it was used as things like seats or even in our various kind of ponds that we've got around the place. So we managed to build the building without any rubbish, and I think that's one of the key things. In Australia, about 46% of our landfill is construction waste. So anything that we can kind of use to kind of slow that down in the process is useful.
Wonderful. To follow that up, there's a question from Meera. Has the complexity of designing and space planning increased over the years due to the environmental considerations to be understood?
Yeah, look, I think you cannot design these days without being sustainable. I think it no longer becomes an option. It's not something that's added on to architecture. I think it's almost inherent to architecture. I think if you're not designing sustainably, you're not designing. You're failing in terms of the function of architecture.
It's kind of
I guess same in toy design, I guess. If you're not thinking about how your product impacts on the planet, then I think you're perhaps not being responsible.
Have you had this concern that, unlike other animals, we've probably created a certain geometry for ourselves, which is not inspired entirely from nature, a geometry which is a lot more rigid? Has it ever troubled you in terms of understanding how we've created an environment which is slightly away from nature?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I mean, for me, I guess I trained in the 1990s, and so I'm probably a bit of a modernist in a sense. So I like straight lines, and I like function, and I like things lining up. So I guess to be in sync with nature, you don't necessarily have to mimic it. I guess you'd say it doesn't have to be a direct copy of nature, and I guess that's perhaps what I'm saying in the talk, that the sense of grandeur that you might get by walking through a red forest might be equal to the sense of grandeur that you get in a great atrium of a skyscraper, but they don't look the same, but they might give your body the same sense of wonder, perhaps.
Okay, there's another question over here, again a little away from what we're in discussion. In Nottingham Healthcare Headquarters project, you have used natural light filled atrium, which plays an important role in speeding up the recovery of patients. Can you share some more aspects which were used in this project to achieve energy targets?
So I just missed the last bit. This bit, I guess, is the usefulness of natural light. So what we're finding in designing hospitals, there's a number of peer-reviewed papers that say that if you've got access to natural light, then your recovery is quicker, and that works well for the hospital in that they can kind of move patients through the hospital, but it obviously also works well for the patient. I mean, another aspect that's found to be really good for patients is music, actually. So it's not just, and I guess here we're talking about the body again. So the body's hearing things, the body's seeing things, and those things are helping the body recover. I'm not sure about the second part of your question. I didn't quite catch
the second part of the question is, can you share some more aspects which were used in this project to achieve energy targets?
I guess, so again, the sustainability act of a building is really important. I don't have any specific calculations off the top of my head in terms of what was achieved, but I guess I'd go back to my initial point, which says if you're not thinking about a building sustainably, you're not designing. But off the top of my head, I can't remember the energy savings.
We should probably do another masterclass with all your projects. That'll be quite an interesting session to add to us as well.
Sure.
Following that, there's another question from Kriti. With respect to the sustainability, what set of restrictions do you face while working with heritage structures, and how do you cope with those hurdles?
Yeah, good question. So here in this building, this was a building that is relatively old by Australian standards. So it was 1890. India, no doubt, has much older buildings, but and of course there were much older buildings in amongst the kind of indigenous inhabitants of Australia before European, but none of those buildings survive. But in terms of heritage, I think you've got to kind of accept that there's going to be a compromise. So if you want to maintain, say, the old brick walls, then you're going to have to accept that the energy ratings of those walls are not going to be as good as if you built them from new. And it's not necessarily desirable to clad them with insulation. So I think you've got to kind of work within what you've got. And of course, the most sustainable thing you can do is not knock something down. So the first step you should make is not demolish something. So if you were to knock down a perfectly good building and rebuild a magnificent passive house, are you being sustainable? I'd perhaps argue that by retaining a building, you're more sustainable than simply knocking it down. So that's the first step. You should perhaps think about when building is what must I destroy, or what can I keep? Because demolition is failure, as one of my architecture friends likes to say.
Wonderful. There's one more question from Priya. What are the common presumptions of clients when it comes to the idea of sustainability? How do you?
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm finding 20 years ago, we would have to talk to clients and really convince them that it was a good idea to be sustainable. So we had to kind of work through the ideas of double glazing or natural ventilation and really kind of convince them that it was a good idea to have this in their buildings. Nowadays, it's an assumption. So almost all clients that come to me will have that assumption that the building is going to be sustainable. So I no longer have to convince someone that to put in double glazing. It's just what everybody accepts will happen. Voltaic cells, natural ventilation, use of greenery, proper orientation, proper shading. All these things are very well accepted. So and even in Australia, I know in Europe and perhaps in India, there's a greater understanding of sustainability than in Australia. I mean, they have triple glazing in a lot of European countries because of the different climate. But I'm fine that it's just assumed that your building would be sustainable here now, which makes our role easier, much easier.
More questions? Fair enough. There's another question. I think a lot of questions coming up. It's flooding. What are the considerations that you took being the lead designer for the International Broadcast Centre for the Sydney Olympic Games? That's a question from Ankita.
Yeah. Okay. We're going back 21 years now to Sydney Olympics. Actually, longer, in fact, in terms of when we designed it. So the main building that I worked on was the International Broadcast Centre, which is where all the TV studios are located. And it was a giant building. It was 450 metres long by 150 metres wide. And I guess the interesting thing about that building is that it was only there for 28 days. So in a sense, it was entirely unsustainable because there was no use for that building after the Olympics. It was just too big. Even our biggest television station, the ABC, which was thinking about moving in there, could only take up about a fifth of the building. There's no other, unless perhaps Australia gets the World Cup soccer. I don't think there's any other event that's kind of going to be big enough in terms of needing such a large TV broadcasting space. So there was interesting consideration there, and what we had to do was think about temporary buildings a lot. So we had to think about how can we ship things in and out of this building so that they can be reused in other spaces. So it was almost a shell. What we ended up using was a giant distribution warehouse, and then creating internal spaces within that space that could be shipped in and shipped out and put containers and moved to a lot of the things from our building went on to the following Olympics in Athens.
Okay, that was pretty much the last question. I thoroughly enjoyed the thought behind today's session, Adrian. Very, very insightful and engaging and thought-provoking for all of them. So many questions, and I believe the audience have been following your work, and there's a lot of questions that have popped up from your previous work as well. Thank you very much for being part of ADW and UID. Have a wonderful day.
It's been a real pleasure to be in India and being in this virtual space with you.
We would like to host you over here in person, probably in the near future. That'll be a good thing to do, and probably have a few more lectures, master classes from your side.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I certainly would like to see India. I've never been there. Actually, I've been to a lot of countries, but never India. So it's something I'd really love to come to one time.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Totally an honor meeting you today. Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
For the audience,